Hi, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Matthew. And in this training video, we're going to be discussing a style, it's not exactly a beer, but a style of alcoholic beverage called cider. Now, cider is inherently different from beer simply because the sugar source is not barley. It's actually apples or apple cider that then gets fermented. Now, ciders are very, very popular and becoming increasingly more popular. They're great with our younger demographic. And they really bring something to the table that's unique, that can't really be replicated by beer.
Yeah, that's right. It's technically not beer because it never goes through that steeping process. Mm-hmm. There's never a germination that happens with the malt. And so in order for something to be considered brewed, and that's why we call beer, and that's why beer is brewed, because it goes through that steeping process. You don't do that with cider, so it's technically not beer. Having said that, it still goes through a fermentation. Mm-hmm. It still can use yeast. It can use a variety of different yeasts. Actually, maybe sometimes even more so of a variety than regular beer can because of the tolerance levels of it. This one is Angry Orchard. It's by Boston Beer Company. You might recognize them as the fine makers of the Samuel Adams line of beer. So they're based out of Boston. However, most of their actual production comes out of a brewery that they brew out of in Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. I believe that's where most of the Angry Orchard stuff comes through as well, is Cincinnati. So let's get it into a glass. This comes in at, what is it, 5%?
5% on the nose.
5%. So it's right on par with what a regular lighter beer would be. And let's talk about the pouring.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, go ahead if you want to explain that.
So ciders have a very specific pour. So the way we're going to pour a cider is by flipping it upside down in the glass. Okay, now we have to be careful when we do this because anytime you touch glass to glass, you risk having a chip or a shard of glass come out in the beer, which is pretty much the worst thing you can do in the context of serving beer at a bar, is to have glass in the beer. So be very careful when you do this. Now, the reason why we're going to pour this cider this way is because ciders are notoriously lightly carbonated. And so we want to create as much of a head as we can. And also, it's actually just a really kind of a cool looking aesthetic to it. So what we're going to do is have these bottles flipped upside down, and then we're going to spin them around the circumference of the glass in like a vortex motion, or a tornado, if you will. So shall we, sir?
All right, go ahead.
Go.
Right. It's so much fun to pour because you don't have to worry about overflowing the glass on the guest. Yeah, all right. So as soon as we poured this, you can smell it.
Yeah, very, very strong aroma. This looks just like your typical cider, which is essentially going to look like carbonated apple juice. I mean, because that's really exactly what it is.
Really
it's carbonated, fermented apple juice.
Very nicely polished.
Yep, very, very, very clear. It's got a pale straw color, slight golden tones, a touch of green as well, which is also not uncommon for this style. Now, ciders can be made with a variety of different types of apple. You can make them with Golden Delicious. You can make them with Granny Smith. You can make them with Washington red apples. There's also some very specific types of apples that are used in the making of cider as well. Now, right away, we get the fact that this has almost nothing in common with your traditional beer smells because it's not made with malt. We're not going to get any malt aromas, right?
Yeah. It's very, very much of a sugary, to put it very broadly, very sugary, a very sweet smell. And really, once you get past that just first wave of sugar, then you can pick up a little bit more than subtle nuances of the apples. Do you know what kind of apples are used in this?
In this one particularly, no, I don't.
It's mostly a blend, though, too. They'll use a couple of different kinds. That you also can use different, in addition to the different kinds of apples you can use different types of yeast as well. Something we should mention that's very, very important also is almost all ciders, including this one, are gluten-free. So they're very, very good for people who have celiacs, for one. Now, if you have your cider on draft and it doesn't come from a bottle, make sure you tell someone, even if they say they have if they say that they have celiacs or a gluten allergy or a gluten intolerance, make sure you let them know that even though there's a cider on that line, maybe there wasn't a cider on that line a few months ago, so there could still be some very, very minute particles of wheat in there. So if someone has a really bad intolerance to it, you always want to make sure, just go for the package. Go for the bottle, go for the can. Otherwise, draft as well. Most people can tolerate it on draft just as well.
But better safe than sorry.
Better safe than sorry.
Yeah, and now that it's starting to open up a little bit, I can really kind of see a little bit more depth to this. Not only do you have that sweetness, that apple sugar, if you will. It smells very fruity, but you also get some underlying notes of like some tartness, and then just a hint of almost like a tiny little bit of bitterness. That's not necessarily a hot bitterness, but it's more from like the skin of an apple, right? It has a very core. Yeah, it has a very different type of flavor than the regular flesh of an apple will.
Now, if you notice, there's no head retention, which is expected. That's completely normal for a cider. That's one of the reasons why we pour the beer the way we do. We did get ahead there for 10 or 15 seconds. There are some kind of rare ciders. I believe Ace Joker is one.
Yep.
They use champagne yeast. Yep. So that one does create a fizzy head. That also, interestingly enough, is not gluten-free.
Sure, and I believe Harpoon Cider
is not. Besides that, I think almost everything else is, but they'll always say it on the package too.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's go ahead and give this one a whirl.
Yeah. Great nose. I would say taste follows the nose pretty much perfectly. What you smell is what you're going to taste in this, and it's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Some sweet apples up front, slight bit of acidity and tartness towards the back end, just a touch of that kind of bitter apple peel right in the middle of your tongue. It's very light. It's very refreshing. Even though there's not a whole lot of head, the body of this definitely has some carbonation. It's got a lively mouthfeel to it. It's a really great beer, I think, for a summer day or daytime, really anytime. But
disc golf?
Absolutely, disc golf, or if somebody's sitting on the patio at your brass tap. It's really, really a refreshing, tart, nice, sweet, light brew.
Yeah, it's surprisingly layered. Full disclosure, I haven't had an Angry Orchard in a long, long time. But it's very surprisingly layered. I can pick out different layers. As the beer washes over your tongue, you can pick out definitely different palate zones that it's hitting. It's a very nice, refreshing brew.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
Not a brew, but
sure. In the technical sense, yeah absolutely. Now, ciders, as we mentioned at the top of the video, are really becoming very, very, very popular, not only for brass taps, but in craft beer in general in the United States. There's several breweries that are producing really, really excellent ciders. And in fact, the brewer from Goose Island, who left during the InBev purchase, actually no longer even brews beer. Considering he was always considered one of the best brewers in the United States. He actually opened, or in the world for that matter, you're right. He actually opened a cidery as opposed to a brewery, which is very, very interesting to me.
Yeah, it's one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing segment of alcoholic beverages. Beyond Angry Orchard, we also have Woodchuck, which is probably the next most well-known. Woodchuck's actually been around for a really long time doing the same, in craft beer terms, a really long time doing ciders. So you'll see Woodchuck a lot. At your local brass tap, it's either going to be Angry Orchard or Woodchuck on draft, most likely. And then we'll have both in bottles.
Sure.
Or cans. Both of them also can now as well, which is really great because it lends to the versatility of having this outdoors on a hot summer day. Poolside, taking it with you.
Sure.
Sand, you don't have to worry about glass breaking or anything like that.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of other versions of ciders that also include other additives like fruits, other styles of apples. In fact, some of your premier cideries right now are actually even barrel aging ciders too. You have bourbon barrel aged cider, which is quite a concept, but the execution of it and the way those ciders, I keep referring to them as beers, how they come out.
It's a tough habit to get out of, I know.
It's really impressive, the wide range and scope that you can achieve within ciders. They're definitely don't have to be pigeonholed into just straight carbonated fermented apple juice.
And having said that, it's going to be interesting to see over the next 5 or 10 years, seeing how the American craft beer scene develops with all these new styles. I'm wondering if it's kind of going that way. This could be completely off base, but maybe you'll have, different, a cider specifically made with Granny Smith, a style specifically made with Golden Delicious, whereas right now, they're all kind of lumped together in this big cider category, but we'll see if they start to split that up a little bit more. Also, one other thing, there's a slight difference between English ciders and American ciders. Just like English beers and American beers. Now, with beers, English beers are going to be a little bit more malty, a little bit more earthy in the utilization of their hops, whereas American beers are going to be more hoppy, just because the American hops have a lot more piney, resinous, citrus flavor to them. With cider, because we're not dealing with hops, a lot of the American ciders are going to be sweeter than the English. You'll hear like an English traditional cider or an English traditional dry cider. Just means that hang, that finish, is a little bit more dry, it's a little bit more abrupt than it is sweet. It can be a very subtle difference depending on the cider, or it could be a marked difference. But if you ever hear a comparison between English ciders and American ciders, that's what they're talking about.
Yeah, and Strongbow would be a pretty good representation of a commercially available, pretty popular English style cider. You're right, and it does have a more dry finish to it, slightly more tart as well.
Yeah. It's still a very sweet, I almost said beer again. It's still a very, very sweet malt beverage. It's just the dryness comes on the very back end. Also, ciders, we use them a lot when we mix drinks.
That's right.
A really, really good mixed drink with a cider is a cider and a framboise.
Sure. Or a black velvet, which is cider with Guinness floating on top of it. It's excellent.
Or a snakebite, which is cider, and then, your lager.
Absolutely.
Or if you're feeling dangerous that day, go ahead and do a pale ale. It's okay.
So cider is versatile, delicious, refreshing, not beer, but we will keep them in our brass tap beer family.
All right. Thank
Cheers.
goodness. Cheers.